Could you or your children be suffering from the symptoms associated with EMF overexposure, also called electrohypersensitivity? You're listening to the 2025 EMF Hazard Summit. My name is Nick, the EMF Guy Pinot, and this is the EMF Hazard Summit, Protect Your Children. In this interview recorded in person at the Deeper Healing Clinic in South Carolina, Dr. Stephanie McCarter talks about the growing epidemic of electrosensitivity or EMF-related symptoms she sees in kids and teenagers. She shares action steps to help them move towards recovery. Dr. Stephanie McCarter is a board-certified physician specializing in internal medicine and environmental medicine. She is nationally and internationally recognized as an expert in environmental medicine and also electromagnetic sensitivity. I'm here with Dr. Stephanie McCarter. Dr. McCarter, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for interviewing me. So, doing this conference.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's a conference about EMFs. Today, I want to focus on what is the effect that these EMFs from Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell phones, cell towers, what is the impact that you're seeing in your practice on children? Because things have been evolving, the electro pollution has been increasing. Have you seen things change in your career in the symptoms that of these children that come into clinics or of teenagers that you see?
Definitely. And I've seen a much increase in the last few years with the development of 4G, 5G into the communities. As you know, 1996 is our current guidelines for electromagnetics, and that was based on the old phones, the frequencies that are much lower than what we're dealing with today. And just recently, the CDC had a study that came out a few weeks ago that 10 to 15-year-olds are now having a 533% increase in rectal cancer. And so you look at that and you look at these are kids that are growing up with 4G, 5G. Is there a correlation? Because in 2021, Dr. Davis did a whole study on 20-year-olds who grew up with Wi-Fi, and they had, at that time, a 4-time increase in rectal cancer. So we are seeing effects, the things we're seeing in our clinic. I used to see maybe 1 or 2 a few years ago, kids that were coming in with anxiety, and we were starting to figure out that there wasn't anything neurologically wrong as far as, structural and physiological studies. But when we take away the Wi-Fi, they were better, and they weren't having any reactions. They were able to sleep, they were able to concentrate. Now we're seeing that. I see that every week. I'm seeing it, particularly teenagers, college kids. They're having severe anxiety. Insomnia is the big one. Mm-hmm. And then inability to focus, inability to concentrate. So it's definitely becoming an issue. And we know that the blue light also is a big part of this because melatonin is our antioxidant, helps us sleep. So we have this epidemic of kids not sleeping. And your melatonin actually starts through the day. But you're getting hit with halogen lights, you're getting hit with LED lights, and then you got the Wi-Fi on top of that. So we have this really unnatural environment, and definitely seeing that in children. And children are so much more susceptible. I mean, especially young children, because their skulls are thinner, and they have this developing nervous system, and we know that's a big deal. Nick Cardaris did all the studies on glow kids. So kids are developing in their cingulate gyrus and their different parts of their brain that are being overstimulated or understimulated. So we're seeing that. We're seeing that people aren't able to really maintain eye contact. Younger people aren't able to just focus, and they're very addicted to these devices. And I think that's a whole nother issue because then it's affecting the dopamine. And dopamine, as you know, it's like if you get sugar or even cocaine, you get this dopamine. All of a sudden, you're doing that every day, focusing. First thing a kid does when they wake up, especially teenagers, is they get their phone out. Well, that's when your brain is still trying to get into what we call theta waves and calming, and then we're just shutting that off, right? And so we have so many things on that level that are affecting children. And so one of the big things we teach here is to lower, especially in the bedroom, lower the exposure. Give the brain and the body a chance to recover. And Dr. Ryder is a great source about blue light. He says that if you look at your phone or your computer screen and the blue light's there, even 1 second, your pineal gland says, oh, it's time to get up, it's time to wake up, let's go. Melatonin shuts off. So these, people go past 9 o'clock and they look at their phone, that's it. I can't sleep, I went till 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big part of this.
So what are the ways that in the bedroom we could improve things? What do you tell? Can you really tell a teenager to
It's
turn
so
off the phone at
difficult.
night? It is difficult, right?
And what I've learned though is that the parents that really enforce it, the kids start feeling better and they do start focusing better during the day. And so it's just getting through that initial step. Victoria Dunkley has a book out about digital detox, and she's a pediatrician. It's a psychiatrist.
Yes.
She did a lot of work with that, and she was talking about even retention. Their grades get better, and that's a big deal. So that's a big step, trying to just, a lot of my patients, their parents will say, we're just going to turn off the phones at this time, for a few hours in the evening.
Yep.
And that just becomes a rule. And it's hard because they are going through withdrawal, a lot of them, and then it's explained to them, and then they feel differently, then they start to go, oh, okay, I can do this, and I do feel better. So that's important.
Yeah, I heard about digital detoxes for teenagers where a lot of them even, group together and decide to do it. And I hope it becomes a trend worldwide, because some of them after the sticking point of maybe day 3 and 4 and getting anxious, I don't have my phone, all of a sudden they feel, oh, I don't
Relaxed.
need my phone, right? So kind of getting over that hump. That's literally withdrawal symptoms.
It is, just like a drug.
Just like a drug. So that's literally, that's something that they have to experience for themselves. And I heard it's not something that every parent listening to this should do, depending on your parent style. But some parents told me, I lock the phones of every teenager in my household in a box on the dinner table every night. I lock them, and then they're going to be unlocked in the morning. Maybe that's what it takes. I don't know if that's going to create a battle in your household if you do that, but this is the level of seriousness that some parents do this with. And for some parents, it works. I think that what can we do for teenagers who always have a phone in their pocket? I don't know. I'm asking you. I don't know if there's an answer, because you talked about colorectal cancer. There's this fear over loss of fertility or testosterone production, but also in women, it could be hormonal disruption.
Exactly.
At least teaching them about this and telling them seems to be so important, right?
Yes, and there's a lot more now on social media, which is helpful because kids are always on Instagram, social media. So there's a lot more influencers and people who they follow who are now talking about radiation and exposing the studies, because it is true. I mean, 3 hours of a cell phone in your pocket can affect your sperm. And so a lot of kids at certain ages say, well, I don't mind. I'm probably sterile anyway. They come back with these quips. But so what I tell parents of those kids is, there are materials you can use, like Get Lambs has the underwear, shielding underwear. They have a pouch you can put in the pocket. They have one that's shieldyourbody.com that, and they still get their phone signal, but they have protection against the body. The ideal thing is not to wear it and have them understand. I think it's really helpful to have a meter. So when kids come in here with their mom and dad, I show them, this is the amount of radiation that is coming off this thing, and it's 24/7, and this is what we're finding. And, Dr. Ray, my mentor, he always said, this is your tobacco. In the old days, doctors said it's good to smoke, it's okay. And now we know we're learning this is not good. And so the U.S. Appeals Court did order the FCC, as you know, to reevaluate 5G, 4G in 2021, which has not really been moving forward. But that was because of the fact that all these studies were not looking at all these other effects, and all these doctors and scientists all over the world have made several appeals. But I think the meter moved when the studies came out with kids getting cancer. And that's what we need to, basically teach the kids. But shielding, and then, trying to get them to just put it on their desk when they're studying, or anything that, gets some time away from it.
Yeah, and I want to switch to schools. The situation in school is very daunting to me. As you know, the EMF guy, it's not getting initially better, although certain schools I've realized by now that having so many tablets for so many students is kind of a freak show sometimes. And there's been many school districts that in fact backtracked on their decision of, handing a tablet to every child. And I know in northern countries, they're a few years ahead of us, and they've stopped these programs, or they use them for a few hours per week. But when it comes to children going in a classroom with Wi-Fi and not feeling well. Are you seeing this in your young patient population? Because that's what I hear from certain parents. My child is going in school and is right underneath the Wi-Fi, doesn't feel good. Are you seeing this in your young patient population?
Yes, and they're having a lot more difficulty with, studying, and their grades are dropping. And so we're educating parents about that. So what a lot of the kids do is we have some devices they wear in the school to help them. There's some harmonizers that are out there. We have one that I feel like really helps the kids. And then the other thing is trying to educate the schools. We do have a few schools that are starting to turn off, they don't allow phones now. But you're right, the computers that are in a classroom, when you have that many tablets, the power density is extremely high.
Yeah.
So it is, if we had a meter, and that's the thing to show the schools is that, in other countries, like you said, they're hardwiring on banks, all these computers. So that is a big issue. And I've seen in the college kids, especially, actually some of the high school kids, a lot more Adderall. So this is inability to focus, inability to concentrate, and so that's becoming the trend. So we try to here at Deeper Healing educate people like that is not the answer, and so the big thing is trying to lower their exposure when they're not in school, and then have these different harmonizers is very helpful. And
do you have brands to mention?
yeah,
You can mention brands.
Yeah, we like EMF solutions.
Okay.
I've had a lot of working with Dr. B. I've had a lot of people bring in gadgets and harmonizers and different products. And Dr. B actually talked to me about this one before I came to Deeper Healing, and I was kind of a skeptic, but we have found it's been very effective. So that calcium chaos that's going into the cell and triggering a lot of this stress, it seems to be very helpful in stopping that. So it's not taking away the signal, but it's allowing the body to not be so affected. Yeah. And so we've seen a lot of success with even our small kids. They have little watches they can wear when they go to school. So that's been extremely helpful. And they have little chips you can put on the device, whether it's the phone or whether it's the computer. And that's been helpful too.
Okay. I know there are limitations to these devices. Some parents are kind of looking for a magic bullet.
Right.
You put this on your Wi-Fi and now your Wi-Fi is safe. I tend to be more prudent and say, maybe this chip will minimize the impact of Wi-Fi, but it's like, I don't know, it's you have to minimize all these exposures in my mind. Would you agree with that too?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's important to put that into context, but still I realize by now that, there are some people that are electrosensitives or kids that are feeling sick, and you cannot fully control these environments in school. So what are you to do as a parent? If there are gadgets or tools that they can wear on their person, well, okay, let's try it. And then at home, a minimization strategy is very smart also, turning off the Wi-Fi at night, for example. So are there other strategies that you've seen improve kids or teenagers that are feeling especially electrosensitive? I know there are many things that could trigger electrosensitivity or that could worsen it, but are there specific strategies that you've applied?
So there's a lot of factors that can make people more sensitive, and I call it the trifecta. There's a lot of pesticide use or chemical use, and also mold exposure. So we look for all of that in our patients, because the more we can help them with that, that's super important, because then they're less electrically sensitive, because it's a cell membrane that gets so easily triggered. So it's already being triggered by whether it's mold or chemicals. And then the other thing is heavy metals. And even though we have young patients and young kids, we're seeing more and more heavy metals, even though life is not that much exposure. But we have this whole thing of bioaccumulation from the parents, like just a mother who's pregnant with silver fillings and things like that. We see high mercury levels. We see lead. Unfortunately, the lead is still everywhere in our community, even though we were told, a few years ago, it's fine at so many parts per billion. So that's a bioaccumulator. So once we start treating the kids, we are seeing these different factors as well. And so we do different treatments to help lower that load. And Dr. B, I'm sure, talked about the load. And that's super important, because as you do that, the tolerance to these other electromagnetic fields is a lot better, and they don't have as much symptoms. That's important.
Yeah. And so what about, are there specific toxins that you've seen trigger that sensitivity, or is it many different types? You talked about pesticides, lead, and where are kids getting them? Is it just through their parents, or is it through certain foods they might be eating? Or?
Correct. Yeah. So organic food is very important, because non-organic food we now know has more and more chemicals, and even some organic brands we have to be careful. So I teach patients about how to research what is the safest foods, because your food is your medicine.
Yeah.
And then we look at their history and what kind of water are they drinking, and where's it coming from? Is it filtered? Because we're seeing a lot more toxins in the water, including heavy metals, and I think Dr. B talked about this, even radiation. That's become an increased thing that we're seeing, unfortunately, because all these different events happened where we had release of radiation, like the atomic bombs and things like that. So these are really important. And then we also look at, teach them not to use pesticides and safe pest control, even pet control, because your dog and your pets, you give them all this stuff and they're like a little cloud of this chemical, and it also affects the pets, that their lifespan and their health. So we teach them all about that, because the more we lower that exposure, the less sensitive they become and more healthy they become.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch gears to something I think that's the number one question. Maybe we should have started with that. Sorry about that. But the AirPods, or,
Yes.
Should parents advise their teenagers to not use them? How do we deal with those?
So I hate AirPods. I'm a big advocate of stop wearing them. We know now that anything over 10 microwatts per meter square that goes affects the body, affects the calcium channels in the cells, affects your nervous system, your anxiety, this big increase. So when they put the AirPods in, I've been measuring them on different people, and they're in the several thousand up to 1 million microwatts.
Yeah.
And we already know, as I said, that 1996 is the last time we tested anything. So this has not been tested properly. And so I know that in Dallas, for instance, there's a lot of surgeons who have been very busy removing parotid tumors, because you have this area right here, right? And then not only that, but then you're also irradiating the brain. We don't have anything long-term, and those are newer than the phones, but we now know this rectal cancer incidence is extremely high. So I tell people, please get those out of your ears. There is a website, Tech Wellness, and I love her website because she talks about the safest headsets, and you can get the kids headsets with the tube, so there's no signal going to the brain whatsoever. And so I recommend that, and just teaching, kids, like, this has not been, just like cigarettes, this has not been tested properly. So I would, I'm very big advocate of not wearing those.
Yeah. Have you seen anyone react in a way to those that gives them tinnitus, for example,
Yes.
or headaches?
Headaches is a big one. They didn't even realize it was related. Same thing with the Apple Watch or the smartwatch. They stopped wearing the watch, and oh my gosh, I had no idea that this was affecting me in this way. And another big thing, I had a patient who was always wearing the AirPod in one ear on the left side, just consistently. And they said when they quit wearing it, they felt like a sensation there for a few days because they were wearing it all the time. So that was really, eye-opening. It's like there's something going on there that changed. And I think there's been some studies now about heat, more and more heat, because that's the big thing with the current guidelines is based on thermal effects. But the non-thermal effects are extremely high as well. I mean, you're talking about your cells in your DNA are like an antenna. So it's very easy for a signal to disrupt that, especially something that's pulse modulated.
Yeah.
So the old analog waveform things are not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a pulse that is very biologically active against cells. So yeah, the more I can educate, the parents and the kids about this, then I say, go for a while without wearing it. Just see if you can do it.
And see if it makes a
And then they do
difference.
notice effects.
Yeah, and
A big one they notice is I can concentrate more at school in the afternoon, or I don't get so sleepy after they, stop wearing it.
that's a huge benefit. So kind of making sure that they can feel it. And one thing I've learned from environmental medicine is this idea of, sometimes I call it an EMF vacation, but it's really, go camping with the family kind of thing to get out of your environment. Can you tell parents how to organize that? Because I feel like it could be a good occasion to make your kids aware that they feel better either without the technology or having a pause from technology for a while.
That's a fantastic thing to do. And a lot of patients have noticed that when they go on vacation. I tell them at least a week, try to do at least a week. And there is a lot of anxiety about that in some kids. So just, have it handy. And then there's actually been a few times where they say, oh, well, I want to go to civilization and use my phone for a minute. But I tell parents, try to keep it, at least 5 days of that. But just knowing the phone is around. But you're right, it's a fantastic way to get kids to see it. I actually did that with my own kids.
Okay.
Yeah. So
how did that go?
So I have a eco house that I built, right? And it has no EMF there. I can hook it up if I want to. So when they came, I took a video of them and just how they were interacting and talking and all that. And then after 10 days of being away from their phone, being outside. That was another thing I wanted to mention. So when kids are really freaking out at dinner time, like, I got to have my phone, have them go outside. Because just going outside and being in touch with the ground and the electrons, they don't realize it, but they start to ground out some of this energy that's keeping them, excited and anxious. Anyway, so then I took a video of them at the end of 10 days. That was powerful. So do that, parents. You could do that because they saw how calm they were.
Wow.
Their demeanor was different, and they couldn't deny it. So that was a great way to do it.
This is like video proof.
Yes.
Look, guys, how crazy you were.
And they were having like the first few days, like I just videotaped little clips of them like spouting off, going off, and then it's undeniable. They're so calm.
It's incredible.
At the end, that they can't deny it.
Well, we're really, I feel like all these devices are kind of hijacking our brains, and we can only realize that they're doing it when you stop doing it for a while, right? So it's very powerful. You mentioned mold, and that's not something we address so much on this summit. So we have a bit of time to talk about mold. How should they think about mold exposures in their children? Is there certain symptoms that are specifically related to mold, or is it, asthma or coughing? Or
there's that kind. There's the sneezy, wheezy type of symptoms, but then there's a lot of neurological symptoms that actually overlap with EMF.
Yep.
So headaches, difficulty concentrating, tinnitus. In the old days, before the Wi-Fi became so prevalent, that was the first thing I would think of when the patient came in and said, I have tinnitus. Oh, well, what's your house like? Do you have mold in your house? And so it's a kind of a synergistic thing now that we're dealing with. In the old days, they built with brick and plaster, which was great, and everything was well ventilated, and there was very little issues with mold. It's a very alkaline environment. So now we have drywall, and we have closed, non-ventilated buildings. So once there's a leak, it doesn't take long for cellulose to just grow some mold. And like I was saying, it's insidious. Like people don't realize. They say, hey, I'm tired a lot, or I'm stressed out, and they're going back into their house, and they have no idea. A lot of patients will say, I went on a trip and I felt great. Well, that's a big sign something's going on in the house, right? I returned and now I'm feeling this again. And the other problem we see in colleges and universities is that the dorms are older, some of the buildings are older. So, the kids call and they say, Mom, I'm stressed out. I can't handle school now. And we find a lot of those patients are having a mold exposure. So we can do tests to help them and look at urine mycotoxins and look at mycotoxin levels, because those are real tiny particles that get stuck in the body, and they're very neurotoxic. They can cause a lot of the symptoms we just discussed, and they're used in biological warfare. So it's important to address that. And increases in EMF sensitivity, because your nervous system is hypersympathetic. So it's super reactive. And then it's just one more thing to hit, another thing to hit it with. So.
Yeah, I think they literally act almost. I know that certain pesticides and certain mold toxins, I don't know if it's aflatoxins or ochratoxin, all of them. And I read studies where they trigger the same mechanism as EMF. So it's kind of literally the perfect storm.
Yes.
The bucket gets filled and filled and filled. So what will you do if you had a kid in a bad environment when it comes to mold? Is it having a mold inspector literally go in the dorm, look at what would be the source of that mold exposure to clean up the environment?
Yes.
You probably refer to professionals in that case.
Right, yes. And then a lot of times the universities are kind of reluctant, or the colleges, so we get a test to show, like an EMA test, environmental mold and mycotoxin test, and show that there's elevated levels of these, and then also in the patient. So if we get the urine test and then it correlates, it's pretty much, there's no denying that. So I've had a couple patients that happened, and they ended up, removing everybody from the dorm and then eventually bulldozing it down. Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. So it
was for the greater good, because it was toxic environment for students. So it's not helping anyone. My God. Okay. Well, they're, at least in that case, they're taking it seriously, because.
Well, they had so many kids getting sick. It was undeniable, right? That they had to do something.
Well, that's a kind of a good, happy ending, not for the dorm, but for the kids.
Right.
I'm really glad that in the end it led to real change. I find that when it comes to mold, even I didn't really take it seriously at first. Mold. Everyone has sometimes some things that leaks, and it's no big deal. You wipe it off, right? So that's not sufficient, right? So when you have someone who lives in a moldy home, and you test, you found mold in the home, is that a situation where they want to relocate, or?
If they can, to a mold-free environment, that would be very beneficial.
Yeah.
As soon as people get out of the mold, they feel different. So it's really helpful, and it helps their body, their mechanisms, all their nervous system, and all of that, rebalance and achieve homeostasis faster. Some people, unfortunately, can't get out of a mold environment. So then I try to get one room blocked off to try, from the rest of the house and close the air vents. And it's very difficult. But the ideal thing is to get out so that they can get it fixed, and making sure they have the right remediators too, because some people don't really do a good job. It's really important to get the right person. We have now mold dogs that go in, when there's a question. Yeah, there's different areas now that we can get a mold dog to help. So we've had patients where there's been difficulty finding it, and then boom, that was where it was. So yeah, the first thing is removal and get it out of the environment. And then the next thing is, start to detox and get what's in the body out. But if they're, like I said, if they're unable to move, we try to just close off an area, air filters, disconnect from the rest of the house, and hopefully, get them into a safe environment when they can.
That's great. And is it true, and I guess that's just a personal question for me, is it true that you can have mold eventually grow inside your sinuses or inside your body? Is that a thing where mold can be uncontrollably growing in you, colonize you? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the mycotoxins are, like I said, very tiny, and they park usually in the liver, so they're very difficult to eradicate. So yeah, that can happen for several years, actually. So patients, come in and they have no idea they've been in this environment this long. And then we see a lot of times when we do our treatment and our testing, we then see the mold coming out. Like we see the levels go high on the
higher
from the baseline test.
Okay, it gets out of the cells and the tissues.
And we see that just if they get out of the house, get out of the moldy environment, automatically the body starts releasing. Okay. So we see it with that. And then with our treatment program that we do here to help maximize that, we see it even more. And then eventually we want to see it go down. So if it doesn't go down, then we say, okay, we need to look at where you're at, what's going on in your environment. Still have to figure out, there's something there.
Perfect. So we talked about the importance of mold, chemical triggers. Is there anything else? Let's open this very widely because you have so much clinical experience. Is there one other thing we didn't address that parents need to know to make sure their kids are healthy? I know that's wide, but maybe you have something
I got
particular.
2 things. We talked about metals.
2 things. Let's
metals
go.
Are important.
Yep.
So making sure, especially with the history, being in an older home, what's going on with as far as lead and mercury. We also know now, just the cesium, thallium, all of that. So I think Dr. B touched on that. Filter the air, filter the water as much as possible. And then the big thing for kids too is the plastics. Trying to avoid plastics as much as possible, because that's becoming, average person ingests 5 grams of microplastic a week. And so but then this gets overwhelming, and the kids that are growing up today are in such a different environment emotionally that's also really important, and just trying to keep, I think that's critical because there is so much uncertainty in what they face compared to 50 years ago or even 10 years ago. So, and with COVID, this created such a change. So I think it's really important for parents to kind of just emotionally keep, their kids from being in a fear state, and just, reassurance and definitely working on the emotional environment at home.
I guess there are ways to to talk about things that are not in a fearful way. Mm-hmm. I try with these summits to do it. I don't know if I do a good job about that all the time, but most of the time I try to focus on, okay, what could be the benefits of a low EMF lifestyle versus saying EMFs are, killing you or something like that.
Exactly. The way you word it, the perspective that you give, yes, is super important.
I think reframing that for kids would be important. And so far, I haven't had this discussion with my 6-year-old yet. He knows a little bit about my work, but it's vague in his mind. But maybe as he becomes older, I'll have discussions about toxicants and what's in your body, and I'll struggle with it myself. So we do our best, but I think it's emotional support must be there, or else, kids are going to be fearful of everything.
Exactly. And that's what I did with my kids when they were younger in the house that I built.
Okay.
It's just try not to really talk about it, but just have it not be there. Like, good food, good air, no Wi-Fi, can turn it on when you want to later, but we're going to avoid it. And this was the clincher. They said, why do I feel so good? Because they will go from one environment into back to home, and I feel so good. That's the clincher. When you get them to feel that stays in their mind. So
that's massive. Thank you so much for the discussion.
Yeah.
I really hope that you liked this presentation. If you want to take action on what you just heard, you'll find links to everything that was mentioned by our guest speaker right underneath this interview. If you love the summit and want to own the recordings in audio, video, and written form for all of these 2025 interviews, make sure to click the buttons on this page to get the 2025 EMF pack. This EMF pack is heavily discounted during the summit launch and for a very limited time. Remember that every purchase supports my work as an independent citizen journalist, as well as the nonprofit partners that are associated with this summit. Thank you for your attention and support, and I'll see you in the next presentation.